The final vote came 3 days later in the main council chamber of Harmony 7 Station. Jake stood with the rest of the human delegation and watched representatives from 43 different species decide whether humanity deserved a place in the galactic community. The chamber was designed like an ancient amphitheater, with curved rows of seats rising up from a central floor, where speakers could address the assembly. Admiral Thompson had spent the morning in closed-door meetings with various faction leaders. Dr. Pierce had presented detailed psychological profiles explaining human behavior patterns. Lisa Bennett had demonstrated human art and literature to cultural committees. Everyone had done their jobs professionally and thoroughly. But Jake suspected that the real decision had been made when he broke Kethrix's arm and then lit a cigar, instead of celebrating or apologizing or making threats. Ambassador Veltoth called the session to order with a device that produced harmonics in frequencies most species could hear. The chamber fell quiet as delegates settled into their specialized seating arrangements. Jake noticed that the Krog delegation had moved closer to the human section, while the Velnari had positioned themselves further away. "We are here to vote on application 44471B for full membership status," Ambassador Veltoth announced. "The applicant species is humanity from the planet Earth in the Sol system. Before we proceed to the vote, each major faction may present final statements." General Thakmore rose from the Krog section. The warrior's scarred scales caught the chamber lighting as he moved to the speaking floor. "The Krog Confederation supports human membership. We have reviewed their military capabilities and found them to be exceptional. More importantly, we have observed their restraint in applying those capabilities. Any species that can break an arm with surgical precision while smoking tobacco is a species that understands the proper use of force." Scattered sounds of agreement came from various sections of the chamber. Jake was still getting used to the idea that breaking someone's arm had become his defining moment in galactic politics. The Zephyrian delegate rose next. Her crystal form had shifted to bright gold, which Jake had learned meant excitement or strong positive emotion. "The Zephyrian Collective supports human membership. Our psychological analysis indicates that humans possess unique cognitive abilities, developed through evolutionary pressure on their death world. They demonstrate remarkable capacity for rapid threat assessment and graduated response under extreme stress. These traits would be valuable additions to our community." More sounds of agreement. Jake began to think the vote might actually go their way. Kethrix rose from the Velnari section, moving carefully with his regeneration device still attached to his healing arm. "The Velnari hegemony has reconsidered our initial assessment of humanity. We tested their reactions under pressure and found them to be adequate. Captain Morrison's response to our test demonstrated tactical thinking and strategic restraint that we did not expect from Deathworld species. We withdraw our objection to human membership." That was better than Jake had hoped for. Kethrix could have pushed for revenge or continued to argue that humans were too violent for civilized society. Instead, the ambassador was publicly admitting that his test had backfired. Several smaller delegations spoke in favor of human membership, citing various technical and cultural contributions humanity could make to the galactic community. A few expressed concerns about human military capabilities, but none called for outright rejection. Ambassador Veltoth called for the formal vote. All in favor of granting full membership status to humanity. Jake counted the lights that appeared above each delegation seating area. Green meant approval, yellow meant abstention, red meant opposition. The tally board showed 41 green lights and 2 yellow. No red lights at all. "The motion passes," Ambassador Veltoth announced. Humanity is granted full membership in the Galactic Council effective immediately. The human delegation erupted in quiet celebration. Admiral Thompson shook hands with everyone, while Dr. Pierce made notes about which species had voted how. Lisa Bennett smiled, despite the healing claw marks on her cheek. Jake felt relieved, but not surprised. The past few days had made it clear that humanity was being evaluated on criteria different from what they had expected. Instead of being judged on their art or science or philosophy, they had been tested on their ability to apply violence precisely and then step back from escalation. After the formal ceremonies ended, Jake found himself in the station bar with an unusual drinking companion. Kethrix had requested a private conversation and suggested they share what he called recreational toxins, alcohol for humans, and something that looked like liquid starlight for Velnari. "I owe you an apology," Kethrix said after his first drink of starlight. "My test was designed to provoke an emotional response that would demonstrate human instability. Instead, you gave me a lesson in controlled aggression." Jake sipped his beer and thought about that. "No apology needed. You were doing your job. Your government wanted to know what humans were really like under pressure." "Yes, but I allowed personal prejudice to influence my methods," Kethrix said. "I believed the reports about Deathworld savagery and expected you to react like mindless predators. When you responded with precision and restraint, it forced me to reconsider everything I thought I knew about your species." "Fair enough," Jake said. "Can I ask what convinced your government to change their position?" Kethrix made that humor, sound Jake was learning to recognize. "General Thakmor shared some interesting intelligence about human military operations. Apparently, your species has been involved in several conflicts in contested border regions. In every case, you achieved your objectives with minimal collateral damage and then withdrew when the mission was complete." That made sense. Human military doctrine emphasized achieving clear objectives efficiently rather than occupying territory or eliminating enemies completely. It was an approach developed from centuries of fighting on Earth, where resources were limited and enemies were numerous. Most galactic military forces operate on principles of overwhelming superiority or total annihilation, Kethrix continued. Humans seem to prefer surgical strikes followed by immediate de-escalation. This suggests a level of strategic sophistication that we found attractive. Jake understood the implications. "You want allies who can solve problems without creating bigger problems." "Exactly," Kethrix said. "The galaxy has enough species capable of destroying everything in sight. What we need are specialists in precise application of force, followed by peaceful resolution." They drank in comfortable silence for several minutes. Jake thought about the long chain of events that had led to this moment. Every choice his ancestors had made on Earth, every lesson learned through generations of survival on a hostile world, had contributed to humanity earning its place among the stars. "Can I ask you something personal?" Kethrix said. "Sure." "When you broke my arm and lit that cigar, what were you thinking?" Jake smiled and pulled out another cigar, the last one from his personal supply. "I was thinking that I had just made a very important point about human capabilities, and I needed to reinforce it with the right gesture. The cigar was meant to show that breaking your arm was not emotionally significant to me. It was just a job that needed to be done." He lit the cigar and offered it to Kethrix. "Want to try some recreational toxins from Earth?" Kethrix accepted the cigar with his good arm and attempted to smoke it. His first try resulted in coughing sounds that attracted attention from other patrons in the bar. His second attempt was more successful. "This is quite pleasant," Kethrix said after a moment. very different from our recreational substances. Tobacco is one of humanity's contributions to galactic culture, Jake said, along with precision violence and strategic restraint. An interesting combination, Kethrix agreed. I think the galaxy is going to find humans to be full of surprises. Jake looked around the bar at the various alien species sharing drinks and conversation. Some of them were watching the human and Velnari smoking together with expressions of curiosity or amusement. Word of their unusual friendship was probably spreading through the station. You know what the funny thing is? Jake said. What? I really did not want to hurt you. Breaking your arm was the least harmful way I could think of to end the situation. If you had been human, I probably would have just grabbed your wrist and twisted until you let go of Lisa. Kethrix made that humor sound again. If I had been human, you probably would not have needed to do anything at all. Humans seem to understand each other's boundaries instinctively. That was true. Growing up on Earth taught humans to read subtle signals about aggression and dominance and threat levels. Most conflicts between humans were resolved through posturing and verbal confrontation rather than actual violence. The irony is that your test was designed to prove humans were unsuitable for galactic civilization, Jake said. Instead, it demonstrated exactly why humans belong here. Yes, Kethrix agreed. Sometimes the best way to learn about someone is to see how they respond when everything goes wrong. They finished their drinks and cigars while discussing human military tactics and Velnari cultural traditions. By the end of the evening, they had 2 days after the incident in the diplomatic hall. Jake found himself in the station's recreational area, trying to understand alien food. The mess hall served cuisine from 40 different worlds, and most of it looked like someone had decided to make eating into a chemistry experiment. He had settled for something that resembled bread and something else that might have been fruit, if fruit came in purple cubes. The recreational area was designed to accommodate different species and their various needs. The gravity was set to galactic standard, which felt slightly light to humans. The lighting could be adjusted for different visual spectrums, and the air mixture could be customized for different breathing requirements. It was impressive engineering, but it felt artificial in ways that made Jake miss the natural randomness of Earth environments. He was reading a report about trade negotiations when Kethrix walked into the mess hall. The Velnari ambassador moved, carefully with his remaining 3 arms. His broken limb had been placed in some kind of regeneration device that looked like metal and crystal wrapped around the damaged area. The device hummed softly and glowed with pale blue light that pulsed, in time with Kethrix's heartbeat. Jake watched the alien choose food items and wondered if this encounter was accidental or planned. Station Harmony 7 was large enough that running into someone by chance was unlikely. Kethrix probably wanted to talk. The ambassador approached Jake's table with deliberate steps, his compound eyes fixed on Jake's face with an intensity that would have been uncomfortable if Jake had not grown up around predators that actually wanted to eat him. "May I sit?" Kethrix asked in his clicking English. "Sure," Jake said and gestured to one of the chairs that had been designed to accommodate different body types. Kethrix settled himself carefully and placed his food on the table. Jake noticed that the alien had chosen items that could be consumed, with 3 arms instead of 4. Adaptation was apparently not limited to Deathworld species. "I wanted to speak with you about what happened," Kethrix said. "Okay," Jake said. He kept his voice neutral and his hands visible on the table. Some species interpreted hidden hands as threatening behavior. "I have been thinking about your response to my test," Kethrix said. Among my people, when someone is challenged, they respond with overwhelming force or they are seen as weak. But you responded with precise force, enough to defeat the challenge, but not enough to create a blood debt between our species. Jake nodded. That was the idea. This suggests a level of strategic thinking that we did not expect from Deathworld primitives, Kethrix continued. You considered not just the immediate threat, but the longer-term consequences of your response. Every action has consequences, Jake said. On Earth, if you kill a predator that threatens your family, you have solved one problem, but you might have created others. Maybe that predator was keeping other worse predators away from your territory. Maybe killing it will bring its pack looking for revenge. You have to think about the whole situation. Kethrix made a sound that might have been agreement. This is why I wanted to speak with you. My species believes that violence is either all-consuming rage or complete restraint. We do not understand your concept of calibrated force. Jake thought about how to explain something that seemed obvious to him. When I was 12, I had to kill a rabid bear that was threatening my sister. I could have used explosives or poison, or burned down half the forest trying to kill it. Instead, I used one rifle shot to the head, quick, clean, and no unnecessary destruction. But how did you learn to make such calculations? Kethrix asked. This level of judgment requires experience, with many different types of threats and responses. Every human learns this, Jake said. Earth teaches us that survival requires good judgment about when to fight, when to run, when to hide, when to cooperate. Get it wrong and you die. Get it right and you live to face the next challenge. Kethrix was quiet for several moments while he ate something that looked like green paste. I spoke with General Thackmore about your species. He says that human military tactics emphasize achieving objectives with minimum necessary force. This is unusual among warrior cultures. Jake smiled slightly. The general knows his business. We learned early that wasting resources on overkill meant having fewer resources available for the next threat. Earth is always throwing new problems at you, so efficiency becomes a survival trait. He also said that human soldiers are trained to function effectively while injured, frightened, or under extreme stress, Kethrix said. Most species lose combat effectiveness when they are hurt or afraid. Fear and pain are just information, Jake said. They tell you something is wrong, but they do not have to stop you from doing what needs to be done. Human mothers give birth in pain, but they stay focused on the job. Human soldiers fight while wounded, but they still follow tactical plans. Kethrix's regeneration device pulsed brighter for a moment. This is what disturbs other species about humans. You function normally under conditions that would incapacitate most beings. Jake understood the concern. It probably looks scary from the outside, but think about it this way. Humans are not naturally tougher or stronger or faster than most species. We survived on a death world because we learned to stay calm and think clearly when everything was going wrong. That skill translates to other situations. Like diplomatic incidents where someone breaks your ambassador's arm, Kethrix said with what Jake was learning to recognize as Velnari humor. Exactly, Jake said. You tested us to see how we would respond under pressure. We showed you that humans can choose their level of response based on the situation rather than just reacting emotionally. Kethrix consumed more green paste and seemed to be considering something. There is another matter I wanted to discuss. My government has been reviewing human military records and technological capabilities. We are impressed by what we have found. Jake waited. This conversation was heading somewhere specific, and he wanted to understand where before he said anything that might cause problems. Human ships are built differently from most galactic vessels, Kethrix continued. Your designs emphasize redundant systems damage control and the ability to continue fighting even when severely damaged. Most species build ships that are either undamaged or destroyed with little middle ground. That was true. Human ship designers had learned from naval warfare on Earth, where vessels needed to stay functional even when taking heavy damage. Multiple backup systems, redundant controls, and crew trained to make repairs during combat were standard features on human military vessels. Your weapons technology is also unusual, Ketherick said. Most galactic civilizations use either overwhelming firepower or advanced defensive systems. Humans use precision weapons designed to disable specific targets without unnecessary collateral damage. Jake nodded. Same principle as everything else. Use exactly as much force as the mission requires. This suggests that humans would be valuable allies in conflicts that require surgical precision rather than overwhelming destruction, Ketherick said. My government is interested in exploring possible military cooperation agreements. Jake kept his expression neutral, but internally he was surprised. The Velnari had gone from calling humans primitive Deathworlders to wanting military alliances in less than 48 hours. Either they were extremely adaptable, or they had been testing human capabilities for reasons beyond simple diplomatic protocol. That would be a question for Admiral Thompson and the diplomatic team, Jake said. I am just a Marine captain who happened to break your arm. Ketherick's made that humor sound again. The Marine captain who broke my arm with precisely calibrated force while considering the diplomatic consequences of his actions. Yes, I think Admiral Thompson will be receiving some interesting proposals in the coming days. Jake finished his purple cube fruit and thought about the implications. If humans were being recruited as precision specialists rather than being dismissed as violent primitives, then the galaxy was more complicated than the briefing materials had suggested. Can I ask you something? Jake said. Certainly. Was striking. Lisa part of a planned test, or did you just lose your temper? Ketherick's was quiet for a long moment. Both, he finally said. My government instructed me to evaluate human responses to various stimuli. But I will admit that your species' reputation for violence made me overconfident about the outcome. Jake understood. You expected us to either back down or go berserk. Yes. Instead, you demonstrated tactical thinking under pressure. This was not what we anticipated from Deathworld primitives. Maybe you should stop calling us primitives, Jake suggested. Yes, Ketherick said. I believe that term is no longer accurate. The station security team arrived 20 minutes too late wearing armor that looked impressive, but moved like they had never used it in a real fight. Their leader was some kind of insectoid species Jake did not recognize, with 6 legs and translucent wings. The security chief looked around the hall at the broken alien arm on the floor, and the human smoking a cigar, and the crowd of delegates who were all talking at once. What happened here? The security chief asked in mechanical-sounding English. Before anyone else could answer, General Thackmore stepped forward. The Krog warrior moved between Jake and the security team with deliberate slowness that somehow managed to look more threatening than quick movement would have been. Ambassador Ketherick's initiated physical combat by striking the human female, General Thackmore said. Captain Morrison responded with appropriate force. The matter is concluded. The security chief's wings buzzed nervously. There are regulations about violence on this station. Neutral territory means all disputes must be resolved through proper channels. The human followed proper channels, General Thackmore said. Among warrior species, when someone attacks your delegation, you respond immediately. To wait for committees and paperwork would be seen as cowardice. Jake watched this exchange with interest. He had expected to be arrested or at least detained while various alien bureaucrats figured out what to do with a human who had broken diplomatic protocol by breaking an ambassador's arm. Instead, one of the most respected military leaders in the galaxy was defending his actions. Admiral Thompson moved to Jake's other side. Captain Morrison will of course cooperate with any investigation. However, I should point out that he was defending a member of our delegation from unprovoked assault. The security chief looked uncomfortable. His 6 legs shifted position constantly, and his wings kept making that buzzing sound. The Velnari delegation is demanding that the human be arrested for assault. They claimed this was an act of unprovoked aggression. Kethrix had been moved to one of the station's medical facilities, but his assistant, a smaller Velnari with silver markings on his carapace, stepped forward. The human savage attacked our ambassador without warning. This proves that Deathworld species cannot control their violent impulses. Jake almost smiled. The alien was trying to rewrite what had just happened in front of dozens of witnesses from multiple species. It was a bold move, but not a smart one. Dr. Helen Pierce spoke up. I believe station security has full sensor coverage of this hall. The recordings should show exactly what occurred and in what order. The security chief's wings stopped buzzing. Yes, all public areas are monitored. I will review the recordings. Please do, Admiral Thompson said. I think you will find that Captain Morrison showed remarkable restraint given the circumstances. While the security team set up their equipment to review the recordings, Jake found himself thinking about his first real fight. He had been 16 and working summer construction in Denver when a crew from another company had decided that humans from the mountain towns were soft. 3 men with 20 pounds each on teenage Jake had cornered him behind a supply shed and demanded his lunch money. Jake's father had taught him that running away was often the smartest choice. But sometimes, running just meant getting hurt from behind. He had put down all 3 men in less than 30 seconds, using techniques learned from his uncle who had been Special Forces. But afterward, instead of celebrating, he had helped them up and even shared his lunch with the guy whose nose he had broken. His foreman had asked him later why he had not called for help or tried to get away. Jake had explained that fighting was sometimes necessary, but it should never be personal. You did what needed to be done, and then you moved on. Captain Morrison, one of the Zephyrian delegates, said. The crystal being had shifted to pale green, which Jake thought meant curiosity. May we ask you some questions about human psychology? Sure, Jake said. He had finished his cigar and was looking around for somewhere to dispose of it properly. Station regulations probably had something to say about tobacco products. When you decided to respond with violence, how did you calculate the appropriate level of force? Jake thought about that. I looked at the situation. Kethrix had attacked Lisa to make a point about human weakness. If I had done nothing, it would have confirmed his argument. If I had killed him, it would have made humans look like savage killers. Breaking one arm sent the right message. But how did you know to break specifically that arm? Another Zephyrian asked. Why not injure him? In some other way? The arm that hit Lisa was the weapon he used against us, Jake said. Taking away the weapon that caused the problem seemed logical. Also, arms heal faster than broken bones in other parts of the body. Dr. Pierce nodded approvingly. This is typical human combat psychology. We tend to match our response to the specific nature of the threat. Someone attacks with fists, we respond to the fists. Someone uses weapons, we address the weapons. The security chief finished reviewing the sensor recordings and looked up from his equipment. His expression was hard to read through the compound eyes and mandibles, but his posture suggested surprise. The recordings show that Ambassador Kethrix struck the human female first, the security chief announced. Captain Morrison's response came 2.3 seconds later. Analysis of the force applied suggests the human used exactly enough pressure to disable the attacking limb without causing additional damage. Kethrix's assistant made angry clicking sounds. The human still committed assault on a diplomatic representative. Actually, said a new voice, he committed lawful defense of a diplomatic representative. Everyone turned to see who had spoken. Standing near the entrance to the hall was someone Jake recognized from the briefing materials, Ambassador Veltoth of the Neutral Arbitration Council. She was from a species called the Mediators, who specialized in resolving disputes between other races. Her people looked vaguely humanoid, but with gray skin and large black eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Under Galactic Council regulations, Ambassador Veltoth continued, physical assault on diplomatic personnel justifies immediate defensive response. The fact that Captain Morrison limited his response to disabling the specific threat rather than eliminating it entirely shows admirable restraint. The hall went quiet again. Jake was getting tired of these dramatic pauses, but he understood that alien politics required careful consideration of every word and gesture. Furthermore, Ambassador Veltoth said, the Krog delegation has invoked warrior culture protocols which recognize Captain Morrison's actions as honorable combat response. General Thackmore's testimony carries significant weight in these matters. Kethrix's assistant looked around the hall as if seeking support from the other delegates. Most of them seemed more interested in studying Jake than in supporting Velnari. Complaints about human violence. So Captain Morrison will not be detained? Admiral Thompson asked. Not unless the Velnari delegation wishes to pursue formal combat resolution, Ambassador Veltoth said. In which case, they would need to designate a champion to face Captain Morrison in single combat according to traditional protocols. Jake hoped it would not come to that. He had nothing personal against Kethrix or his people. The ambassador had been testing human resolve and had gotten a clear answer. That should be the end of it. Kethrix's assistant conferred quietly with other members of his delegation. Jake could not understand their clicking language, but their body posture suggested heated disagreement about something. Finally, the assistant turned back to face the assembled delegates. The Velnari delegation will not pursue formal combat resolution. We acknowledge that Captain Morrison acted within acceptable parameters for defensive response. General Thackmore made that grinding laugh sound again. Wise choice. I have studied human military records. Your champion would not survive the encounter. Jake thought that was probably true, but kept the opinion to himself. The point was not to demonstrate human superiority, but to establish that humans could be trusted to respond appropriately to different situations. If that settles the immediate legal questions, Admiral Thompson said, perhaps we could return to the cultural exchange ceremony. I believe we still have much to learn from each other. Ambassador Veltoth nodded. An excellent suggestion. I think this incident has been quite educational for all species involved. Jake looked around the hall one more time. The other delegates were watching him with expressions he was starting to recognize as respect mixed with wariness. It was the same look he had seen on the faces of veterans who had learned to trust each other in combat, but never forgot that. Everyone was carrying weapons. That seemed about right for human relationships with the galaxy. The silence in the hall stretched like a wire pulled too tight. Jake stood over the broken Velnari arm and continued smoking his cigar as if nothing unusual had happened. Around him, dozens of alien delegates stared with eyes and sensors and whatever they used to see the world. The smell of Cuban tobacco mixed with the recycled air and something that might have been alien fear. Kethrix had stopped screaming, but his breathing came in short gasps. His compound eyes focused on Jake with what looked like disbelief. The other three arms clutched at his chest while his broken limb lay on the crystal floor like discarded meat. General Thakmore of the Krog delegation stepped forward. Jake had read the files on this one. A warrior who had fought in 17 campaigns across 3 star systems and had personally killed more enemies than some human battalions. The general's scales were darker than the other Krog and scarred from old battles. When he spoke, his voice sounded like rocks grinding together. Impressive, General Thakmore said in heavily accented English. Most beings lose control when they fight. You did exactly what was needed and stopped. Jake took another draw from his cigar and nodded slightly. Thank you, General. The Zephyrians had turned bright orange and were making high-pitched sounds that their translators could not process. Dr. Helen Pierce stepped forward from the human delegation. She was their xenopsychologist, the person whose job was to understand how different species thought and felt and made decisions. What you just witnessed, Dr. Pierce said to the assembled delegates, was not human savagery. It was human precision. She walked to where Jake stood and gestured toward Kethrix's broken arm. Captain Morrison could have torn that limb off completely. He could have broken the ambassador's neck or crushed his skull or damaged him in ways that would take months to heal. Instead, he applied exactly enough force to disable the attacking limb and no more. One of the smaller delegates, Jake thought, it might be from the Krill Confederation, made chittering sounds that the translators turned into words. But the violence was so sudden, so controlled. How does a being switch from peaceful to dangerous so quickly? Jake remembered being 8, years old and watching his father deal with a mountain lion that had wandered too close to their house in Colorado. His father had not panicked or gotten angry. He had simply picked up a rifle and put the animal down with one clean shot. Afterward, he had explained to young Jake that violence was a tool like any other tool. You used exactly as much as the job required and not one bit more. On Earth, Jake said, we learn early that the world is trying to kill us. Weather storms that can level cities, animals that see humans as food, plants that are poisonous to touch, diseases that can wipe out entire populations. We had to get smart about danger or we died. He took another draw from his cigar and let the smoke out slowly. Every human child learns to judge threats and respond appropriately. Too little response, and you die. Too much response and you waste energy you might need later. Dr. Pierce nodded. What you call human violence is actually human efficiency. We have learned to calibrate our responses to match the level of threat we face. General, Thakmore made a sound that might have been approval. On our world, we fight or we die. But we fight with rage and fury until the enemy is destroyed completely. Humans fight with calculation. It is disturbing, said one of the Zephyrians. The crystal being had shifted to purple, which according to the briefing materials meant confusion or unease. To apply violence so precisely suggests a level of familiarity with harm that we find unsettling. Admiral Thompson stepped forward. May I tell you about Captain Morrison's background? The delegates waited. Even Kethrix seemed to be listening despite his pain. Jake Morrison was born in the Rocky Mountains where winter temperatures can kill an unprepared human in minutes. He learned to hunt before he learned to drive. At age 12, he killed a bear that threatened his younger sister. Not because he wanted to, but because it needed to be done. Jake thought about that day. The bear had been sick. probably rabid, and had come too close to the house where his sister Sarah was playing. He had taken his father's rifle and made the shot from 40 yards, clean and quick. His father had been proud of him, but had also explained that taking a life, even an animal life, was serious business that should never be done lightly. He joined the Marines at 18, Admiral Thompson continued. Served in the Titan mining, conflicts where human settlements were being attacked by raiders. He earned decorations for bravery, but more importantly, for restraint. There were 3 separate incidents where he could have killed enemy combatants, but chose instead to disable them. Jake remembered those fights too. Young men barely out of their teens who had been told that attacking human mining operations was the only way to feed their families. He had put them down without permanent damage and made sure they got medical attention afterward. Violence was a tool, but mercy was also a choice. After his military service, Admiral Thompson said, Captain Morrison earned degrees in philosophy and psychology. He speaks 4 languages and has read extensively about conflict resolution. The man who broke Ambassador Kethrix's arm is also someone who has spent years studying how to avoid violence whenever possible. One of the smaller delegates made questioning sounds. If he studies peace, why did he choose violence so quickly? Dr. Pierce answered. Because he recognized that Ambassador Kethrix's attack on our cultural representative was a test. Among many species, including the Krog, physical challenges must be answered physically, or they are seen as signs of weakness. Captain Morrison responded in a way that would be understood and respected by warrior cultures while demonstrating the human ability to control the level of damage inflicted. General Thackmore made that grinding sound again, which Jake was starting to think meant agreement. On our world, if someone strikes your female, you respond with overwhelming force, or you are seen as weak. But humans broke exactly 1 arm. Enough to show strength, not enough to start a war. Jake finished his cigar and looked around the hall. The other delegates were still watching him, but the fear seemed to be changing into something else. Curiosity, maybe. Or respect. The thing about growing up on a death world, Jake said, is that you learn to make hard choices fast. Every day you decide how much risk to take, how much force to use, how much energy to spend on different problems. You learn that violence is sometimes necessary, but it should never be your first choice or your only choice. He gestured toward Kethrix, who was being helped by medical personnel from the station staff. The ambassador tested us. He wanted to see if humans would react like frightened prey animals or mindless predators. Instead, we showed him that humans are something different. We are beings who can choose exactly how dangerous we want to be, in any given moment. Kethrix looked up at Jake with his compound eyes. Blood had dried around his mandibles and his breathing was still uneven, but he was alert. You could have killed me. Yes, Jake said simply. Why did you not? Jake thought about that question. The real answer was complicated and had to do with growing up in a place where death was always close, but life was still precious. Where his father had taught him that a man was measured not by how much damage he could do, but by how much restraint he could show when he had the power to do damage. Because killing you would not have solved the problem, Jake said. Breaking your arm solved the problem. The hall stayed quiet for several more seconds. Then General Thackmore began to make a sound that Jake realized was Krog laughter, like rocks tumbling down a mountain but somehow pleased. Deathworlders, the general said, I begin to understand why the galaxy should pay attention to your species. Jake Morrison stood in the grand hall of Galactic Council Station Harmony 7 and watched the alien delegates move around like dancers at some cosmic ballet he did not understand. The station floated in neutral space between star systems and served as the meeting place for dozens of different species who wanted to talk instead of fight. Today was supposed to be simple, a cultural exchange ceremony where humans would show they could play nice with others and maybe earn a spot in the galactic community. The hall stretched up so high that Jake could barely see the ceiling. Walls, made of some kind of crystal, caught and reflected light from 100 different sources. The air tasted clean, but somehow wrong. Too clean, maybe, like it had been scrubbed of everything that made it real. Jake preferred the recycled air on human ships that carried hints of coffee and metal and people who worked hard. Around him moved creatures that would have seemed impossible just 50 years ago. The Velnari looked like giant praying mantises that had learned to walk upright and wear fancy clothes. Their forearms moved in patterns that reminded Jake of sign language, but prettier and more complex. Their ambassador Kethrix stood near the center of the room, wearing what looked like golden silk and speaking in clicks and whistles to anyone who would listen. The Krog delegates stayed together in their own group, and Jake respected that. They looked like what would happen if someone crossed a crocodile with a person and then gave the result military training. Their scales were dark green and black, and their eyes never stopped moving. Jake had read the files. These were warriors from a world where everything wanted to eat everything else. He understood that kind of background. The Zephyrians fascinated him most. They were not made of flesh at all, but of some kind of living crystal that changed colors when they thought or felt strongly. Right now, the 3 Zephyrian delegates glowed soft blue, which according to the briefing materials meant they were curious or studying something. They had been watching the humans since the moment the delegation arrived. Lisa Bennett walked up beside Jake and adjusted her formal dress. She had been chosen as the human cultural representative because she knew 7 languages and had written 3 books about interspecies communication. Jake liked her because she never pretended to know more than she did, and she asked good questions. "How are you feeling about this?" she asked quietly. "Like we are being judged," Jake said. "Which we are." The ceremony was starting. All the delegates gathered in a large circle, and one by one each species would present something that showed who they were and what they valued. The Krog went first and performed what looked like a martial arts demonstration, but with weapons. Jake watched them move and knew these beings understood violence in ways that most humans had forgotten. The Zephyrians created patterns of light and sound that made Jake think of mathematics and music having a conversation. It was beautiful in a way that made his chest feel tight. The Velnari presented a dance that involved all 4 arms moving in impossible coordination, while their leader sang in harmonics that human ears could barely process. Then it was humanity's turn. Admiral Grace Thompson stepped forward. She had chosen to wear her dress uniform instead of the formal robes the diplomats suggested. Jake approved. The woman had earned her rank in the asteroid mining conflicts and had scars on her hands to prove it. She began to speak about human achievements in art and science and exploration. That was when Kethrix decided to interrupt. The Velnari ambassador moved forward with his 4 arms spread in what Jake recognized as an aggressive posture. The alien was tall, maybe 7 feet, and his insect-like head turned toward Admiral Thompson with what humans might call contempt if humans had compound eyes and mandibles. "This is waste of time," Kethrix said in his clicking English. "Humans are Deathworld primitives. Your species comes from worlds so dangerous that you had to become violent just to survive. You have no place among civilized beings." The hall went quiet. Jake felt his muscles tense but forced himself to stay still. This was exactly what they had been warned might happen. Some species looked down on humans because Earth was classified as a death world, a planet so hostile that evolution had to make everything tough and mean just to keep breathing. Admiral Thompson kept her voice calm. We believe our experiences have taught us valuable lessons about cooperation and survival. Cooperation? Kethrix made a sound like laughing but sharper. Your species has been at war with itself for thousands of years. You fight over resources and ideas and patches of dirt. Even now you cannot agree among yourselves about simple things. Jake watched the other delegates. The Krog were paying attention, but their faces showed nothing. The Zephyrians had shifted to orange, which meant they were concerned or worried. Other species Jake could not read were moving back slightly as if they expected trouble. We have learned from our conflicts, Admiral Thompson said. We have grown beyond them. Have you? Kethrix stepped closer. Or are you still the same savage creatures who killed each other with rocks and sticks? Do you think putting on nice clothes and learning to speak properly changes what you are inside? Lisa Bennett moved forward. Jake could see she was trying to diffuse the situation before it got worse. Her job was to build bridges between species and find common ground where none seemed to exist. Ambassador Kethrix, she said, using the formal pronunciation that took 3 seconds to get through. Perhaps we could find better ways to understand each other. Our species may have different backgrounds, but we all want the same basic things. Kethrix turned toward her, and Jake saw what was going to happen a full second before it started. The alien's posture changed, and his arms moved in patterns that Jake had learned to recognize during the briefings. This was challenge behavior. Among the Velnari, they were about to make this personal. You speak of understanding, Kethrix said. Let me help you understand something simple. The alien raised one of his 4 arms and struck Lisa across the face. His claws left 3 red lines on her cheek and she stumbled backward. Blood ran down her face and dripped onto her formal dress. The hall exploded in sound. Delegates from different species made noises of shock or anger or something else entirely. Security officers started moving, but they were too far away, and this was happening too fast. Jake stepped forward. He had spent 12 years in the Marines and fought in 3 different conflicts and trained in 17 different combat systems. But more than that, he had grown up on Earth where making the wrong choice about violence could get you killed in ways that ranged from quick to very slow. Every human learned early how to read situations and decide how much force was needed and when. Jake reached Kethrix in 3 steps. The alien was still processing what had just happened and probably expected the humans to either run away or lose control and attack wildly. Instead, Jake grabbed one of Kethrix's 4 arms, the one that had struck Lisa, and applied pressure at 2 specific points. The arm broke with sounds like green wood snapping. Kethrix screamed, a noise like metal tearing that filled the hall and made everyone stop what they were doing. The broken arm fell to the floor and twitched twice before going still. Jake reached into his jacket and pulled out a cigar. It was a good one, Cuban tobacco that he had been saving for when the humans either got accepted into the Galactic Council or got thrown out and had to find their own way in the universe. He lit the cigar with a small flame from his lighter and took a long, slow draw. The smoke felt familiar and calming. Then he looked directly at Kethrix, who was holding his remaining 3 arms against his chest and making small hurt noises. The hall stayed completely quiet, except for the alien's breathing and the small sound the cigar made when Jake drew on it again.